In today's video, we're not just diving into a beautiful story, we're also exploring how storytelling can be one of the best ways to practice English. When you read, listen, speak, and write, you engage with the language in ways that textbooks or formal lessons often can't match. Stories bring English to life, making it easier to understand grammar, expand vocabulary, and practice pronunciation, all while enjoying something meaningful. Now, let's talk about the story we're going to explore today. This is the tale of a quiet man named Samuel, whose kindness went unnoticed by the world around him. He spent his life helping others, but never once asked for recognition. What happens when a person's good deeds are forgotten? And how can one person's humble acts of kindness change an entire town? This story teaches us valuable lessons about humility, the power of quiet deeds, and how even the smallest acts of kindness can make the world a better place. As you listen to this story, think about the English you're practicing. Reading allows you to connect with new vocabulary and sentence structures. Listening helps you improve your understanding of spoken English and pronunciation. Speaking and writing, when you retell or discuss the story, help solidify what you've learned. All these skills work together, just like the pieces of a good story, and help you build confidence in your English journey. So, join me in exploring how stories can teach us English in an engaging, natural way, while also showing us the powerful impact of kindness. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Man of Quiet Deeds. In a small town, not far from the busy streets and crowded marketplaces, there lived a man named Samuel. His life was simple, unremarkable in the eyes of most, and yet filled with quiet goodness. Every day he went about his tasks, helping others in the background without seeking any recognition. No one ever seemed to notice him, not really. He never asked for praise or attention, and that was just the way he liked it. Samuel believed that true kindness didn't need to be loud or celebrated. It was something you did simply because it was the right thing to do. Samuel's home was a modest little house at the edge of the town, far enough away from the noise and busy roads to find peace. His house was surrounded by a small garden where wildflowers grew and birds often came to sing. He liked to sit outside in the mornings, watching the world wake up, sipping on his tea as the sun rose over the town. His world, though simple, was calm. It was in these quiet moments that he felt most at peace, and that peace filled his heart with kindness, which he shared without hesitation. Most days, Samuel could be found helping others in ways that no one paid much attention to. He would stop to help the elderly woman who lived down the road, carrying her heavy bags of groceries, even though he knew she had family who could help. He'd fix a broken fence for Mr. Miller, the grumpy man who lived 2 houses away, without ever expecting a thank you. He was the person who smiled at children when they looked lost, who held the door open for strangers, and who would leave a basket of fruit on the doorstep of a neighbor who was ill. These acts were small, barely noticed, but they made a difference. They brought a little light to a world that often moved too fast, too loud. But in this busy town, where people rushed from one place to another, no one took the time to notice Samuel. The streets were always crowded, filled with people rushing to work, to meetings, to their errands. They passed each other without a glance, too caught up in their own lives to see the quiet man who was always there, doing little things that made life a bit better for those around him. If anyone did notice him, they probably thought of him as just another face in the crowd, someone who didn't stand out. Samuel didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it this way. The town itself was a bustling place. Children ran through the streets after school, laughing and playing, their voices echoing off the stone buildings. The shops were always busy with customers hurrying in and out, their minds focused on what they needed to buy. People would chat in passing, sharing small talk about the weather or the news of the day, but no one ever stopped long enough to truly see each other. It was a place full of movement and noise, and yet so many important things were overlooked. The kindness of one person, the small acts of love and care that helped hold everything together. Samuel didn't mind the fast pace of the town. He didn't need the rush or the noise. His own world was slower, quieter. He didn't measure his life by what others saw or remembered. He measured it by the feeling he had in his heart when he helped someone, by the quiet joy of knowing that he made a small difference in someone's day. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes it felt like no one appreciated what he did, and that could be a little lonely. But Samuel knew that the right thing was still worth doing, no matter how unnoticed it might be. As he went about his daily routine, Samuel never worried about the future. He didn't wonder if people would remember him or if anyone would ever recognize all the things he did. He believed that kindness was its own reward. He would smile at the world, no matter how busy or distracted it seemed, because he knew that even the smallest act of kindness mattered. If a neighbor smiled back, or if a child felt comforted by his presence, that was enough for him. It wasn't about fame or glory. It was about peace and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done something good. But Samuel had a feeling deep inside that things wouldn't always stay the same. He didn't know why or how, but something told him that one day something would happen that would change everything. The town wouldn't stay so busy and unaware forever. People would eventually begin to notice the small things, the quiet kindness, the acts that went unnoticed for so long. It was a feeling he couldn't explain, but it was there, like a soft whisper in the back of his mind. He didn't know when or how it would happen, but one day the people in the town would see him. They would see what he had been doing all along. For now, though, Samuel simply continued his quiet life. He kept helping, kept giving, and kept smiling. He didn't expect anything in return, and he didn't need anything. His joy came from the simple act of kindness itself. The world might not notice him, but that was okay. Samuel was content, and he knew that even if no one else remembered his name, his quiet deeds would have touched the lives of those who needed them most. And that, to him, was enough. In the heart of the bustling town, amidst the noise and rush, there was a man who lived a life of quiet goodness. His name was Samuel, and while no one noticed him now, deep down, something told him that would change. The kindness he spread would not be forgotten forever. Chapter 2. The Unseen Efforts. Each day Samuel woke with the sunrise, the first light filtering through his curtains and warming the small room he called home. He didn't need an alarm. His body knew the rhythm of the world around him. After stretching and sipping a cup of tea, he would step outside to take in the fresh morning air. The town was still quiet, the streets mostly empty as people were still fast asleep or already rushing about their busy lives. This was the time Samuel cherished most, the early hours before the noise and rush took over. He began each day with small, quiet acts of kindness. On his walk to the local market, he often passed by stray animals. Some had no owners to care for them, roaming the streets in search of food. Samuel had made it his habit to bring a little extra bread or some scraps of meat from his kitchen to feed them. He wasn't a rich man, but he had enough to share, and the animals knew it. They would follow him, wagging their tails or purring softly, and he would pause to give them a kind word and a few pieces of food. After feeding the animals, Samuel made his way into the town center, where the small local market buzzed with activity. He would often stop by Mrs. Roberts' grocery stand, where the elderly woman worked alone, struggling to carry heavy boxes and bags. Every time Samuel passed by, he'd offer to help. He would carry the boxes, place the bags neatly in her cart, or simply chat with her for a moment to ease the loneliness she often felt. Mrs. Roberts always smiled and thanked him, but it was clear that she was used to being alone. No one else ever stopped to help. He would continue his walk through the town, taking the long way to admire the trees that lined the streets and to say hello to those few familiar faces he saw each day. There was the baker, Mrs. Green, who often waved at him as he passed her shop. She never had much time to talk, always busy kneading dough or filling orders. The young children, too, would wave at him when they spotted him walking along the road, but they were always in a hurry to catch up with their friends, too absorbed in their own worlds to slow down for a conversation. Samuel's heart was full of quiet peace. He didn't mind that he didn't have close friends or a bustling social life. The town was busy and people had their own worries and schedules to follow. What mattered to Samuel was the simple act of helping where he could, without any expectation in return. It didn't matter if he was thanked or noticed. The good he did was enough in itself. Helping was what he believed in. It was the way he lived, and it was enough. After finishing his errands, Samuel would often spend time with the elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, who lived at the end of the road. Mr. Jenkins wasn't as mobile as he used to be, and Samuel often helped him with little things, carrying firewood, fixing a leaky tap, or just sitting with him on the porch, sharing stories from the past. Mr. Jenkins didn't have many visitors, and Samuel's company was a small comfort. Every so often, the old man would murmur a quiet, "Thank you," but Samuel never expected more. The moments of peace and kindness were more than enough. Later in the day, Samuel would find himself sitting on a bench in the town square, watching the world go by. The streets grew busier as the afternoon wore on, people rushing to their jobs, their meetings, or their errands. Samuel's presence, sitting quietly on the bench with his thoughts, seemed to go unnoticed by most. A few people might pass by with a nod or a polite smile, but there was never any real conversation. No one stopped to ask how he was. No one seemed to care what he was thinking. He was just there, like a part of the town that blended into the background, never drawing attention, never demanding anything. Samuel felt this indifference deeply at times. It was as if he existed only in the spaces between the more important things in the town, important to everyone else, that is. The busy streets, The rush of the morning, the sounds of children playing, the chatter of storekeepers, all of it drowned out the quiet presence of one man who was simply trying to make life a little better for those around him. Sometimes, as he sat alone on that bench, he couldn't help but feel lonely, like he was invisible to the world. But it wasn't the loneliness that bothered him most. It was the fact that the kindness he gave so freely seemed to slip through the cracks, unnoticed, as if it didn't matter. Still, Samuel didn't let that silence discourage him. His spirit remained strong, even in the quiet moments of solitude. He didn't need the loud applause or the recognition that others seemed to chase after. His heart found joy in the small, silent gestures of love and care, the small acts that no one else seemed to notice. He didn't measure his worth by how many people saw him. He measured it by how many lives he touched, even if only for a moment. In a world full of noise and distractions, Samuel's kindness was a quiet hum, a soft whisper in the background. He helped without fanfare, without applause, and without ever asking for anything in return. He knew that people were busy, that they had their own lives to live, but he also knew that even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference, even if it was never seen or remembered. His efforts, though unseen, were not without meaning. Samuel's quiet strength was in his ability to keep giving, even when the world seemed to forget. And so, he continued each day, quietly helping, quietly giving, with no expectation of thanks. The loneliness didn't break him. It only made him stronger. He knew that one way or another, his kindness would have an impact, even if it took time for the world to notice. Chapter 3. An unexpected event. It was a crisp autumn morning when the unexpected happened, a sudden change in the usual rhythm of life in the town. For the first time in a long while, the streets were filled with chaos and confusion. It started with a loud crash that echoed down the main street, followed by the shrill sound of a siren. People stopped in their tracks, their conversations interrupted, eyes darting toward the source of the noise. An accident had occurred at the intersection by the town square. An overturned delivery truck, its cargo spilled out onto the road, blocking traffic and causing a scene. The accident itself wasn't a small one. The driver was injured, and the road was covered with broken glass and crates that had fallen from the truck. The townspeople, though they had seen accidents before, were suddenly unsure of what to do. The town, so used to its peaceful, predictable days, found itself thrust into a state of panic. People screamed for help, some calling emergency services, others rushing to the scene to try to assist. Yet, in all the commotion, no one seemed to know exactly how to handle the situation. The driver was pinned in the truck, and the crowd was growing, but no one was taking charge. The urgency was clear, but so was the confusion. As the sirens grew louder and emergency vehicles rushed to the scene, the townspeople began to panic, looking around for someone with experience, someone who could help. The town was full of busy people, but when faced with a real crisis, they lacked the calmness and leadership needed to handle it. There were a few voices raised in the crowd. "Someone help him." "Call the fire department." "Where's the ambulance?" But amidst the noise, the people were not paying attention to the most obvious solution that was standing quietly among them. Samuel. Samuel had been walking through the square when he heard the crash. He had seen the truck tip over, its cargo spilling out, and he had immediately understood that the situation required calm and careful action. While everyone else rushed to the scene in a flurry of activity, Samuel remained calm, standing at the edge of the crowd, watching, waiting. He didn't rush into the chaos. He knew better. Instead, he took a deep breath, gathering himself before walking toward the wreckage. He was not a trained emergency responder, but Samuel knew the basics. He had helped people before, his neighbors, the elderly, the sick. But this was different. This was a real emergency, and there was no time to waste. His first instinct was to check on the driver, who was still trapped in the truck. There were people standing around him, but no one was actually doing anything. They were all too scared or unsure of how to act. Samuel didn't hesitate. Without a word, he knelt beside the truck, assessing the situation. He noticed the broken glass and the twisted metal, but also saw the open path to the driver's side. He gently called out to the driver, "It's okay, I'm here." "You're going to be fine." Samuel's calm voice was a stark contrast to the panic that had surrounded the scene. He reached inside, offering a steady hand to help the driver, speaking to him softly, reassuring him that help was on the way. Without making a fuss or demanding attention, Samuel began to carefully clear the debris around the driver. His movements were deliberate and careful, making sure not to cause further harm. He helped the injured man out of the truck, holding him steady as they moved away from the wreckage. All the while, the people around him watched, unsure of what to do. They had been caught in the panic, frozen by fear, while Samuel quietly took control, doing what needed to be done without anyone noticing how important his actions were. The emergency vehicles arrived shortly after, but by then, Samuel had already ensured the driver's safety. He stepped back, blending into the crowd again, as paramedics and firefighters took over. The townspeople finally began to notice him, but only after the crisis had passed. The man who had been so calm, so quietly efficient in his actions, was suddenly a figure of mystery. Where had he come from? How had he known what to do? But no one said anything. They were too busy with the emergency at hand to give much thought to the quiet man who had just stepped in when needed most. For Samuel, this was just another day. He had done what needed to be done, as he always did, without thinking twice. It wasn't about being a hero. It wasn't about the praise or the attention. It was simply about helping someone in need, in the only way he knew how. He didn't care if anyone thanked him or remembered his name. As he quietly walked away from the scene, he felt a sense of peace in his heart. He had done his part, and that was enough. The townspeople, meanwhile, slowly began to realize something. The man who had stepped in, so quietly and without fanfare, was no stranger. It was Samuel, the same man who had always been there, helping in the background, unnoticed. The people who had been so busy rushing around, shouting for help, now saw him for the first time in a new light. But Samuel was already gone, back to his quiet life, his simple routine, content in the knowledge that he had done what was right. The town had needed someone to step in, to be the calm in the storm, but they had not looked in the right place. They had been too caught up in the noise to notice that the person who could help had always been there, quietly working in the background, helping without the need for recognition. As the dust settled, the people of the town found themselves quietly questioning, How many times had Samuel been there, doing what no one else could or would do, and how many times had they failed to see him? For Samuel, though, it didn't matter. He had helped, and that was all that mattered to him. The quiet hero, unnoticed once again, returned to his humble life, knowing that sometimes the greatest deeds are the ones done without anyone noticing. Chapter 4. The Moment of Recognition. In the days that followed the accident, life in the town gradually returned to its usual pace. The streets, once filled with chaos, were now calm again, the people going about their daily business. Yet, something had changed, though it was not immediately clear to everyone. There was an air of quiet reflection in the town, a subtle shift that began to ripple through the hearts of the people. The events of the accident, and the calm way Samuel had stepped in to help, lingered in their minds, though they were too busy to fully process what had happened at first. It was only later, in the quiet moments of their routines, that a few began to notice something important. Samuel, the man they had passed by every day without a second thought, had been there when they needed him most. He had been the one who didn't panic, who didn't shout or demand attention. He was simply there, quietly doing what needed to be done. It was a realization that crept up on people, like a slow, dawning light. They had seen him around before, of course, but they had never truly seen him. It started with Mrs. Roberts, the elderly grocer who had always smiled at Samuel when he helped her with her bags. She had been at the scene of the accident, watching the chaos unfold, when she saw Samuel calmly pulling the injured driver from the truck. She had noticed the way he spoke to the man, gently reassuring him, his voice a calm presence amidst the storm of noise. Mrs. Roberts had been so caught up in the rush of the moment that she hadn't thought much of it at the time, but later, as she sat quietly in her kitchen, it hit her. Samuel had been the one to step in when everyone else was frozen. He had done it without any fanfare, without any demand for attention. A few days after the incident, she was in her shop, wrapping up some fruit for a customer, when she found herself telling a neighbor about what she had witnessed. "You know," she said, her voice soft but filled with a new awareness, "Samuel was there when that truck tipped over. He didn't wait for someone to tell him what to do. He just stepped in and helped. No one else seemed to notice, but he was the one who kept things from getting worse." Her neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, who was in his 70s and often sat by the window watching the world go by, looked up in surprise. "Samuel?" he repeated, his voice full of curiosity. "The quiet man who lives at the edge of town? He's always so, well, quiet." Mrs. Roberts nodded. "Yes, that's the one. But he's been helping all along, hasn't he? I think we all missed it." Her eyes softened with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "He's always there, doing little things for people, helping with groceries, fixing fences, feeding the stray animals. I never really paid attention to it until now. But now I see it. He's been helping us all along." As the words left her mouth, something inside her shifted. The realization that she had overlooked his kindness for so long made her feel a little ashamed, but also grateful. She felt a growing sense of respect for the quiet man who had always been there, unnoticed, and now she couldn't help but talk about him. It was as if a door had opened in her mind, allowing her to see Samuel for who he truly was. A man who, though unnoticed by most, had a quiet strength that made the town a better place. The conversation between Mrs. Roberts and Mr. Jenkins didn't stop there. Word spread slowly at first, whispered from one person to another. It wasn't a grand revelation, nor was it met with loud applause. It was a quiet realization that began to spread, like the soft glow of morning sunlight slowly lifting the shadows. A few more people started to recall the little things Samuel had done, how he had always helped without asking for anything in return, how he had smiled at them even when they hadn't acknowledged him. The more people thought about it, the more they realized how much he had been a part of their lives without them ever truly seeing him. One afternoon, a young woman named Lily, who worked at the bakery, was sitting in the park with her friend when she mentioned Samuel's name. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I saw him the other day, after the accident. I didn't know it was him at first, but I realized later that he was the one who helped the driver. He was calm and didn't seem to be scared like the rest of us. He just did what needed to be done." Her friend, who had known Samuel by sight but never really spoken to him, nodded slowly. "That's strange, isn't it? He's always so quiet. I've seen him around, always helping people, but never really thought about it. It's like he's just part of the background, you know?" Lily smiled, a small, soft smile that reflected a new understanding. "Yes, exactly. I think we've all been missing something. He's been there all along, helping us without needing anything in return." As these small conversations began to spread, more and more people started to notice Samuel in a new light. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't fast. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was real. The people who had once ignored him or taken his kindness for granted began to feel a sense of quiet gratitude. They started to recognize that Samuel had been there, always doing good in the background, without asking for a single thing in return. And yet, Samuel remained as he had always been, quiet, humble, and unaware of the changes happening around him. He had no need for praise. His actions had never been about recognition. He helped because it was right, not because he expected anything in return. But as the days went on, the people around him started to realize that the quiet man who had always been a part of their lives had made a bigger impact than they had ever known. The recognition came not with a loud celebration, but with a quiet shift in the hearts of the townspeople. They realized that Samuel, in his own gentle way, had been the glue that held them all together. His kindness had shaped the town in ways they hadn't understood until now, and though they hadn't noticed at first, they were beginning to understand just how much he had been doing all along. The feeling of surprise and gratitude spread through the town. People who had once been too busy or indifferent to notice the small things now began to see Samuel for what he truly was, a man of quiet strength and endless kindness, whose influence could be felt in every corner of the town. The impact, though small at first, was undeniable, and it was just the beginning. Chapter 5. The town starts to change. As the quiet realization of Samuel's kindness spread through the town, something began to shift in the very air they breathed. It wasn't a sudden change, nor was it loud or dramatic. There were no grand gestures or public celebrations, but the effect was undeniable. The town, which had once felt like a place where people barely took the time to notice one another, started to soften. A subtle warmth began to fill the streets, as if the very spirit of kindness was slowly weaving its way through the hearts of the townspeople. At first, it was small things. Mrs. Roberts, inspired by the way Samuel had helped her without asking for anything in return, found herself going out of her way to smile more at the customers who came into her shop. She made an effort to greet people with more warmth, even offering a few extra apples to a young mother with a crying child. The kindness she had received was now reflected in her actions toward others. She wasn't the only one. The ripple effect was beginning to take root. Lily, who had noticed Samuel's quiet strength after the accident, started to see the small ways she could help too. She began taking the time to chat with the elderly customers who came to the bakery, offering them a kind word and a moment of attention. She found herself carrying groceries for a neighbor, just as Samuel had done for Mrs. Roberts so many times. It wasn't a big change, but it was a change nonetheless. The more she gave, the more she felt the warmth of it in her heart. She realized that kindness was like a fire. It spread, and the more you gave, the more it grew. Even the children, who had once been focused only on their games and their own worlds, began to follow this new spirit of kindness. They helped each other more on the playground, offering a hand to those who tripped or sharing their snacks with those who had none. It was as if the very idea of being kind was starting to take root in their young hearts. They had learned, perhaps without even realizing it, that kindness wasn't something to be taken for granted. It was something to be practiced, something that made life a little brighter for everyone. As the days passed, the change became more noticeable. The town, once filled with rushed faces and hurried footsteps, started to slow down just a little. People began to make eye contact with one another, to smile more, to ask how others were doing, even if only in passing. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but there was a shift that Samuel had started without even meaning to. He had never sought to change the town, to make it better. But the quiet ripple of his kindness had done just that. It had created a soft, quiet revolution in the hearts of those around him. Samuel himself noticed the change, though not in the way that most would. He saw it in the way people started to stop and speak to him more. People who had once passed by without a second glance now stopped to greet him. They thanked him, though he rarely knew exactly for what. They smiled at him, and it wasn't just a polite smile anymore. It was a smile of recognition, of gratitude. It was as if they had come to see him for the first time, to understand the quiet strength that had always been there. At first, Samuel didn't know what to make of the attention. He was still the same man he had always been, the man who preferred to help quietly, without recognition. But he couldn't deny that the town was different now. There was a softness to the atmosphere, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. People weren't rushing as much. They weren't so absorbed in their own lives. They were starting to see each other, to care about one another in ways they hadn't before. The most striking part of this change was how it felt in the town square. Before, it had been a place where people hurried by, barely glancing at each other. But now, people lingered a little longer, smiled a little more. There was a new sense of connection, a feeling that the people in the square weren't just strangers passing by. They were neighbors, sharing in the same small, quiet world. Even the hustle of the market seemed different. as if it had slowed down just enough to allow space for a word of kindness, a helping hand, or a warm smile. The townspeople were beginning to understand something that had always been there, but that they had never truly noticed before, that kindness, even in small doses, had the power to change everything. They began to help each other more, without the expectation of anything in return. It wasn't about recognition or rewards. It was simply about making the world a little better, one small act at a time. For Samuel, this change was a quiet victory. He didn't know that his small, unnoticed efforts had started a shift in the town's atmosphere, but he felt it. He felt it in the way people greeted him more warmly, in the way they looked him in the eye and acknowledged his presence. He didn't seek gratitude, but the quiet respect he now felt from others was enough. It wasn't the kind of change that could be measured by applause or loud celebration. It was the kind of change that seeped into the everyday moments, the quiet exchanges, the small kindnesses that no one would ever list on a chart, but that had the power to transform everything. And yet, even with the growing sense of connection, there were still those who didn't fully understand the power of what had happened. Some people still rushed through their days, still caught up in their own concerns. The shift, though real, was still subtle, like the slow turning of a wheel that hadn't yet reached full speed. But Samuel knew, even if no one else did, that this was only the beginning. The ripple effect of his quiet acts of kindness was still unfolding, and the town would never be the same. The contrast between the old, busy, indifferent town and the new, more compassionate place it was becoming was palpable. The streets, once filled with hurrying footsteps and distracted faces, were now softer. People were beginning to slow down, to notice each other, to help when they could. The change had begun, and while it was still small, Samuel could feel it in the way the air felt lighter, the way people smiled just a little more. The town was changing, one small act of kindness at a time, and though no one would ever say it out loud, they all knew the man who had started it. Samuel, the quiet man who had always helped without asking, had sparked something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 6. A Quiet Hero. The town had changed in ways that were not always easy to see, but the shift was undeniable. There was a new warmth in the air, a gentleness in the way people interacted with one another. They smiled more. They helped more. They took the time to truly see each other, even in the busy moments of their daily lives. This shift, though small, had made a deep impact on the people of the town. They were starting to appreciate one another in ways they hadn't before, and in this newfound appreciation, they began to recognize Samuel for the first time. It wasn't an official celebration, not in the way most people might expect. There were no grand speeches, no big gatherings in the town square, but something important was happening. People began to greet Samuel with a new sense of respect. Mrs. Roberts, who had first spoken up about his kindness, was often seen stopping to chat with him as he walked by. She would offer him a warm smile, ask how he was doing, and thank him for everything he had done. Though, of course, she still didn't know the full extent of his kindness. Others, too, began to speak to him more, to acknowledge his presence in a way they hadn't before. One morning, as Samuel was helping an elderly man carry his groceries to his doorstep, A group of women who had been chatting outside the bakery turned to watch. They smiled as they saw him go about his work, quietly helping without any need for recognition. "There he goes again," one of them remarked. "That's Samuel, always helping. He never asks for anything in return." They watched for a moment longer, nodding in agreement, then turned back to their conversation. There was no fanfare, no loud announcement. It wasn't a public celebration, but it was something. A small, quiet acknowledgement of the man who had been the heart of the town's newfound warmth. Slowly, word spread, and though it wasn't said out loud, people began to see Samuel in a new light. They appreciated him more, and their appreciation wasn't always expressed in words. Sometimes, it was simply a friendly nod or a smile when he passed by. Other times it was a small favor returned, helping him with a task or offering him something in gratitude. But Samuel, as always, did not seek any of this attention. In fact, it made him uncomfortable. When people thanked him, or when they tried to show their appreciation, he would shift uncomfortably, mumble a polite response, and quickly move on. He didn't like the spotlight. He didn't want to be praised for simply doing what he believed was right. For Samuel, helping others was just a natural part of life. It was never about the thanks or recognition. It was about making the world a little better in whatever small way he could. He often found himself walking away from these moments of recognition, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and discomfort. He appreciated the kindness, of course, but he didn't understand it. Why should people thank him for doing something that felt so simple to him? He didn't want to be seen as special. He didn't want to be treated differently. For Samuel, kindness was not something that needed to be celebrated. It was something that should simply be done, without fanfare or expectation. The more people tried to show their gratitude, the more distant Samuel seemed to become. He didn't understand why they felt the need to make a big deal out of something that, to him, was so simple. He didn't want to be treated like a hero. To him, heroes were people who did grand things, who made a big impact. He was just Samuel, the quiet man who helped when he could, without needing recognition. This growing discomfort began to raise questions in the minds of the townspeople. Why didn't Samuel accept their gratitude? Why did he always deflect their thanks, almost as if he was embarrassed by it? Some people started to talk about it, curious about his strange reluctance. A few of them wondered aloud if he didn't want to be seen as different, or if he simply didn't like the attention. But for others, the questions went deeper. What did it mean to be humble? What value was there in kindness that didn't ask for anything in return? Was humility truly a virtue, or was it something that kept people from truly appreciating the good they did? As these conversations spread, they created a quiet tension in the town. On the one hand, people admired Samuel's humility. They respected his unwillingness to accept praise, seeing it as proof of his sincerity and his deep understanding of what it meant to help others. But on the other hand, some wondered if his refusal to accept gratitude was a sign of something else, a kind of quiet pride, or perhaps an unwillingness to let people in. They weren't sure. It was a mystery, one that left them with more questions than answers. One evening, as the town gathered in the square for the weekly market, a group of people stood near the fountain, discussing Samuel's behavior. "I don't know," said Lily, the young woman from the bakery. He's always so kind, but whenever anyone thanks him, he just shrugs it off. It's almost like he doesn't want us to appreciate him." Mrs. Roberts, who had always been Samuel's biggest advocate, shook her head. "I think he's just humble. He doesn't want to be seen as better than anyone else. He helps because it's the right thing to do, not because he wants praise." "But don't you think he deserves it?" Another voice spoke up. "He's changed the whole town with his kindness. People are helping each other more, smiling more. I feel like we should do something for him, you know?" Mrs. Roberts thought for a moment, then smiled softly. "Maybe the best way we can thank him is to keep doing what he's shown us, to keep helping each other, quietly without needing recognition. Maybe that's the gift he's been giving us all along." There was a quiet pause as everyone considered her words. The tension began to dissolve as the group realized that perhaps the greatest way to honor Samuel wasn't by giving him praise, but by following his example, by living the way he had taught them, quietly, humbly, without expecting anything in return. Samuel may not have wanted recognition, but through his actions, he had shown the town a deeper truth, that kindness didn't need to be celebrated. It was enough to do it, to make the world better with each small gesture, and maybe, just maybe, that was the true power of humility, the ability to give without expecting anything back, and to change the world without ever asking for it. As the people of the town slowly began to understand this, the quiet hero continued to live his life, doing what he had always done. He didn't need their recognition. He didn't need their thanks. The quiet difference he had made was enough for him, and slowly, the town began to realize that sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones who didn't want to be heroes at all. Chapter 7. A Town Transformed. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but over time, the transformation in the town became impossible to ignore. What had started as small, almost unnoticed acts of kindness, quietly woven into the fabric of daily life, had grown into something bigger. The people who once hurried past one another, too absorbed in their own lives to pause, had begun to slow down. They took time to help each other, to offer small gestures of kindness, to smile when they met someone's eye. It wasn't something anyone had planned. It was a change that had occurred quietly, softly, almost imperceptibly. But it had happened. The streets, once filled with hurried steps and distracted faces, now had a new rhythm. People said good morning to one another as they passed. Neighbors who had never spoken before now waved and exchanged brief conversations about the weather or how their families were doing. Children, once caught up in their own worlds, now helped one another on the playground. If one child dropped a toy, another would be there in an instant to pick it up. There was a gentleness to the town now, an undercurrent of care that seemed to touch everything. Mrs. Roberts, the elderly grocer, often noticed it as she watched the customers in her store. They were more patient with one another, more understanding. If someone was in a rush and didn't have enough change, someone else would offer to cover the difference. If a person seemed tired, others would check in to make sure they were okay. The kindness that had once been reserved for Samuel was now being shared among the entire community. At the market, the atmosphere had changed as well. The once bustling marketplace, filled with the noise of people talking over one another, now had a quieter, warmer feel. People lingered a little longer, speaking softly, helping one another with shopping bags, offering to carry things for those who were struggling. Even the shopkeepers seemed to have caught the spirit of the town. Mrs. Green, the baker, made an extra loaf of bread for a customer who had recently lost a loved one, not because she was asked, but because it felt right. The change was subtle, but it was everywhere. Samuel, as he had always done, continued his quiet work. He helped without seeking recognition. He was still the same man who fed the stray animals, helped carry groceries, and listened patiently to those who needed someone to talk to. But now, there was something different in the way the townspeople saw him. They realized that it wasn't just Samuel's kindness that had made the town a better place. It was the kindness that had spread because of him. Samuel had become more than just the quiet man who helped others. He had become a symbol of something bigger, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. The town had started to celebrate kindness in its own quiet way. It wasn't a celebration of Samuel, not directly. No, the town had learned that the true value of what he had done wasn't about honoring one person. It was about understanding that kindness was a force that could be shared, that it could ripple through a community and bring people closer together. It wasn't about one hero. It was about the idea of kindness itself. One evening, as the sun set and the streets grew quiet, a small group of people gathered at the park. It wasn't an event planned in advance, but rather a spontaneous gathering of people who wanted to express their gratitude to the town that had become more compassionate and kinder. As they stood together, looking at the soft glow of the streetlights, someone spoke up. "Do you remember how things used to be?" Mrs. Roberts asked, her voice filled with warmth. "How we all used to rush around, barely noticing each other." There were nods from the small crowd, each person reflecting on the way things had been. "But now," Mrs. Roberts continued, "now we help each other. We see each other. We've learned to slow down and be there for one another." Someone else spoke up, a young man who had recently moved to the town. "I never really understood how small acts of kindness could matter. But now, I see it. It's the little things that make the biggest difference." There was a shared moment of understanding in the crowd, a warmth that spread among them like the soft glow of the streetlights. They weren't just talking about the changes in the town, they were feeling them, experiencing them in the way they moved through the world now. And in that moment, though Samuel was not there, he was present in spirit. The change had happened because of him, yes, but it had become something more. It had become something they could all be a part of. The town had learned that kindness was not just about giving, it was also about receiving and sharing and nurturing a sense of community that they had once lost. As the group slowly dispersed, there was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. People spoke to each other as they walked home, their conversations softer, more genuine. The kindness that had once been Samuel's alone was now the town's, and it was spreading, reaching into every corner of their lives. It was no longer just about one person's actions. It was about the collective spirit of the community and the power that simple acts of kindness could have. For Samuel, who had not sought any recognition, the town's transformation was the quietest of victories. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had never wanted to change the town. He had simply wanted to help, to make the world a little better in whatever small way he could. And now, as he continued to walk through the streets, quietly doing what he always did, he could feel the change. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. The town had transformed, not because of a single event or a single person, but because of the collective spirit of kindness that had taken root. And for the first time in a long while, Samuel felt a deep, quiet peace. The town, once busy and indifferent, had become a place where people truly cared for one another. And in his own way, Samuel had played a part in that. A quiet hero, whose kindness had sparked a change that was now part of the very fabric of the town. The warmth of that realization spread through him, and he walked on, knowing that the world was, indeed, a little better than it had been before. Chapter 8. The Final Test. For all the kindness that had blossomed in the town, life, as it always does, still had its challenges. Samuel's life, though full of quiet goodness, was not immune to the difficulties of living in the world. One autumn afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Samuel received a letter that would change everything for him. It was from the doctor in a nearby town, informing him that he had a serious health condition. It wasn't something that could be easily fixed. The doctor advised him to take immediate rest and to seek treatment, though the path ahead was unclear. Samuel, though shocked, was not one to complain. He had never been one to ask for help, much less share his struggles. For days, he kept the news to himself, quietly dealing with the illness in solitude, as he always had. But as the days passed, Samuel's condition worsened. The small tasks that he had once performed without thinking, carrying groceries, helping his neighbors, became more difficult. His body grew weaker, and the quiet man who had always been the one to lend a hand found himself in need of one. And yet, he didn't reach out. He couldn't. His pride, his humility, and the quiet strength that had always defined him told him to carry on without burdening anyone. He kept his head down, continuing to help when he could, but always hiding the pain that had begun to seep into his bones. The people of the town, however, began to notice. They had learned, through Samuel's example, to notice the small things, the way people looked, the way they carried themselves, the subtle signs of struggle that might have gone unnoticed before. Mrs. Roberts was the first to see it. She hadn't seen Samuel out for his usual morning walks in several days, and when he did appear, he looked paler, weaker, moving slower than usual. She asked him if he was feeling okay, and for the first time, Samuel hesitated. "It's nothing," he said quickly, brushing it off. "Just a bit of tiredness. I'll be fine." But Mrs. Roberts wasn't convinced. She had learned enough from Samuel's quiet acts of kindness to recognize that something was wrong. She decided to visit him that evening, bringing some of her homemade soup, knowing that he often ate alone. When she knocked on his door, Samuel opened it with a forced smile, but the look in his eyes betrayed the truth. "I'm fine, Mrs. Roberts. Really," he said, but his voice was weak. She didn't buy it. "Samuel, you've been helping us all for so long. It's time for us to help you. Let me in." With a sigh, Samuel stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She noticed the tiredness in his eyes, the way he winced slightly as he moved. And though she didn't say anything more, she knew this was more than just a little illness. The next morning, Mrs. Roberts told a few close friends about Samuel's condition, urging them to check in on him. The town had already begun to shift, but this was different. It wasn't about being kind to strangers anymore. It was about showing care for someone who had given so much without ever asking for anything in return. The word spread quickly, and before long, people began to stop by Samuel's house, bringing food, offering help, and checking in on him. They were concerned, yes, but they were also grateful for everything Samuel had done for them. They wanted to repay his kindness, to show him that he was not alone. At first, Samuel resisted their help. He felt uncomfortable with the attention, embarrassed by the idea of others caring for him. He had spent his life helping, not being helped, but the people wouldn't let him push them away. Mrs. Roberts made sure to bring him soup every evening, and Lily from the bakery insisted on delivering bread to his doorstep each morning. Mr. Jenkins, despite his own age and frailty, offered to help Samuel with any tasks that needed to be done, even though Samuel had always been the one to offer his help to others. And so it continued. The town that had learned to care for one another now rallied around the man who had taught them what kindness truly meant. People helped him with small tasks, checked on him regularly, and made sure he wasn't alone. Samuel, though still uncomfortable with the attention, slowly began to accept their care. The pride that had once kept him silent was now replaced with a quiet gratitude. For the first time, he felt the warmth of the town's collective kindness, and it filled him with a sense of peace that he had never known. One evening, as he sat by his window, watching the soft glow of the streetlights, Samuel reflected on what had happened. He realized that the town, once indifferent and busy, had become something entirely different. It wasn't just that they had learned to help each other, it was that they had learned to truly see one another. They had learned to care, to offer help when needed, to celebrate the quiet acts of kindness that had once gone unnoticed. And now, when he needed help, they were there, not out of obligation, but out of the love and respect they had for him. He could see it in the way they acted now, not just because they recognized his worth, but because they had learned to value the worth in all people. Samuel had always believed that kindness was the most important thing, and now the town had embraced that belief. The change that had begun with him had spread beyond him, and now the entire town was filled with a quiet, enduring strength. The people had transformed into a community bound by empathy, compassion, and the simple belief that helping one another was the true meaning of life. Samuel's heart swelled with a mixture of humility and joy. For all the times he had felt alone in his quiet deeds, for all the moments when his kindness had gone unnoticed, he now understood that it had never been in vain. The town had become a place where kindness was the foundation, where people cared for one another, where even the smallest acts of goodness mattered. In that moment, Samuel knew that he had given the town a gift far more precious than he had realized. He had given them the ability to see each other, not just as faces passing by, but as people worth helping, worth caring for, and in return, they had given him something he had never expected, the gift of being cared for, of being loved in the way he had always loved others. As he rested, feeling the warmth of the town's embrace, Samuel closed his eyes. The town had changed because of him, but it had also changed because of them. It was no longer just one man's quiet kindness. It was the town's collective spirit. And in that, Samuel found his greatest reward. Chapter 9. The Man's Legacy. The days grew shorter as autumn faded into the chill of winter, and Samuel found himself sitting more often by his window, watching the world outside change with the seasons. His illness had kept him confined to his home for longer periods, and though he had grown accustomed to the quiet solitude, there was a deep, reflective peace that had settled in his heart. He often thought about the journey he had taken, the life he had lived, simple, quiet, and unnoticed by most. In his quieter moments, Samuel found himself reflecting on his purpose. His life had never been about seeking fame or recognition. He had always believed in the simple truth that kindness mattered more than anything else. But now, as he sat in the warmth of his home, surrounded by the love and care of the people who had become his family in ways he had never expected, he realized just how profound an impact he had made. For so long, he had gone unnoticed, helping others without expecting anything in return. It had been the way he had always lived. And though there were times when he wondered if anyone would ever truly see him, he had never wavered from his path. It wasn't about praise or reward. It was about the quiet joy he felt in knowing he had made a difference, even if that difference was small and hidden from the world. Now, with the town's transformation before him, Samuel understood that his true value had not been in how many people knew his name or how often he was thanked. It had been in the way his actions had touched lives, the way his quiet deeds had created a ripple of kindness that had spread through the town. The people had learned to see one another, to care for one another, and to help each other without expecting anything in return. Samuel had planted the seeds of kindness, but it was the town that had nurtured them, and together they had grown into something beautiful. As he thought about it, a sense of peace washed over him. He had never needed to be celebrated, never needed to be recognized for his efforts. The quiet impact he had made, the lives he had touched, that was enough for him. It was enough to know that the world had been made better because he had lived in it, even if no one ever truly knew the full extent of what he had done. The townspeople, too, had begun to reflect on their own lives. They had learned from Samuel, and now they understood that true kindness did not need to be loud or celebrated. It didn't need to be grand or noticed by the masses. It was the small, everyday acts, the helping hand, the warm smile, the quiet moments of care that had the power to change the world. They had learned that kindness, when given freely and without expectation, could ripple out and touch hearts in ways that were deeper and more lasting than they could ever have imagined. They had learned, as Samuel had always known, that sometimes the greatest impact came from the quietest actions. They no longer measured a person's worth by how loudly they spoke or how much attention they received. They measured it by how they treated others, by the love and care they shared, by the small things they did to make the world a little better. As the town embraced this new perspective, they found themselves becoming a community in the truest sense of the word. They no longer rushed past one another, too busy to notice the needs of others. Instead, they took the time to stop, to help, to share a moment of kindness. And though the transformation had started with Samuel, It had grown into something that belonged to everyone. The town had learned that kindness wasn't just about one person's actions, it was about the collective spirit of a community that cared for one another. For Samuel, this realization brought a deep sense of peace. He had given everything he could, and though he had never expected anything in return, he now saw that his life had mattered. His quiet deeds had not been in vain. The town had changed because of him, yes, but more importantly, it had changed because they had learned to live with kindness as the foundation of their lives. That, to Samuel, was the greatest legacy he could leave behind. There were no grand ceremonies, no loud celebrations to mark the end of his journey. But in the quiet moments, when the town gathered to help one another, to support one another, Samuel knew that his legacy lived on. It lived in every act of kindness, every smile shared, every moment of care between neighbors. It lived in the way the people had learned to be better, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to be. In the stillness of the night, Samuel looked out at the town he had helped shape. He felt no need for recognition, no desire for thanks. The town, now full of warmth and care, was the truest gift he could have asked for. And with that thought, Samuel closed his eyes, feeling a deep, peaceful acceptance settle in his heart. The world had been made a little better because of him, and that was all he had ever hoped for. As the seasons passed, the town continued to thrive, bound by the quiet power of kindness. And though Samuel was no longer as visible in their daily lives, his presence was felt in every corner of the town, in every act of generosity, in every quiet moment of love. His legacy lived on, not in the stories told about him, but in the way the town had become a place where kindness was the norm, where people truly cared for one another. It was a legacy that would continue to grow long after he was gone. Chapter 10. The Kindness Remains. The winter days grew colder, and the snow began to blanket the town in a peaceful quiet. The trees stood bare, their branches dusted with frost, and the town streets, once filled with the hurry of busy lives, were now quiet, save for the soft crunch of footsteps in the snow. The people of the town had learned to slow down, to savor the moments, to truly see one another. The transformation that had begun with one man's quiet kindness had taken root, and it had changed everything. Samuel had been a part of that change, a quiet hero whose presence had shaped the town in ways that were hard to put into words. But now, in the stillness of winter, the town faced the inevitable. Samuel's illness, which had once seemed manageable, had taken its toll. One evening, as the town lay under a blanket of snow, Samuel passed away quietly in his sleep, the final chapter of his life written in the simplest of ways. There were no grand ceremonies, no loud mourning, just the quiet peace that had marked his life. Yet even in his passing, Samuel's spirit of kindness did not leave the town. It remained, woven into the very fabric of the community he had helped shape. Though he was no longer there in body, the legacy of his quiet generosity continued to live on in the hearts of those who had learned from him. The day of Samuel's passing, the town was still. There were no grand memorials or public gatherings. Instead, the people of the town quietly came together in their own way. They did not need to be told how to honor him. They had already learned from him. One by one, they gathered in small groups, doing the things Samuel had done every day, helping one another without asking for anything in return, offering support to those who needed it, and showing kindness in the most simple, quiet ways. Mrs. Roberts, who had known Samuel best, made a large pot of soup and took it to the homes of those who had been struggling. Lily, the young woman from the bakery, delivered fresh bread to the elderly and to families who had lost someone. Even the children, who had learned the importance of helping each other, began to do their part, offering to carry groceries for those with heavy bags, lending a hand to neighbors in need, and sharing a smile with those who felt lonely. The town had learned something important from Samuel, something that could not be measured by awards or recognition, but by the quiet power of simple, everyday acts of kindness. And now, in the wake of his passing, that lesson continued to shape the town. The kindness that had once been Samuel's alone had become the town's, and it had become a part of their daily lives. It was no longer something they thought about occasionally. It was something that had become the norm. Helping each other, showing care, and giving without expecting anything in return had become part of the town's very soul. The impact of Samuel's life could not be measured in the usual ways. It was not the number of people who had heard his name or the accolades he had received. It was not in the grand gestures, the loud celebrations, or the recognition of his deeds. His legacy was in the quiet ways the people of the town now lived their lives. They had learned the power of inner value, of humility, and of kindness that didn't seek anything in return. They had learned that kindness didn't have to be loud to be powerful, and that small acts of goodness could create ripples that touched hearts far beyond what the eye could see. And so, life in the town continued, quieter and more connected than ever before. The streets, though still busy with the work of everyday life, now felt different. People took the time to help one another, to share a kind word, to offer a hand when it was needed. The hustle and bustle had softened. It was as though the entire town had learned to breathe a little more deeply, to care a little more deeply, and to love a little more deeply. In Samuel's absence, the town had become a place where kindness was the foundation, where people didn't just see one another as faces in the crowd, but as fellow travelers on the same journey, each with their own struggles, each deserving of kindness and respect. The quiet man who had never asked for recognition had given them something much more valuable than fame or applause. He had given them the ability to truly care for one another, to appreciate the small, quiet gestures that made the world a better place. And though Samuel's name would not be spoken as often in the years to come, his spirit lived on in the way the people treated each other, in the way they offered help, in the way they valued kindness above all else. The lessons he had taught were now etched into the town's very soul, and they would continue to influence generations to come. As the town continued to grow and change, the people never forgot the quiet hero who had shown them the way. They remembered him not for the things he had done, but for the way he had made them feel, valued, seen, and worthy of kindness. And they understood, now more than ever, that true greatness was not found in loud actions or grand gestures, but in the quiet, humble ways we show love and care for each other. In the end, the town's transformation had not just been about Samuel. It had been about the people, and the power of kindness they had learned to cherish. And in that, Samuel's legacy would always remain. Thank you so much for joining me today on Read and Learn English. I hope you enjoyed the story of Samuel. The quiet man whose kindness changed an entire town. Stories like these not only teach us valuable life lessons, but they're also a powerful tool for learning English in a fun and natural way. Remember, as you practice reading, listening, speaking, and writing, stories give you the chance to engage with the language in real-world contexts, helping you build your skills without even realizing it. The more you immerse yourself in stories, the more fluent you'll become in English. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on more great stories and language tips. And don't forget to share this with your friends. Learning English through stories is always better when we do it together. Keep practicing, keep learning, and remember, English is a journey. Every step counts. See you in the next video.